The scrape of porcelain was the only sound she could trust. Each plate, heavy and smeared with the ghost of a truffle reduction, was an anchor in the chaos. Steam ghosted across her face, dampening the stray hairs that had escaped her hasty bun. The light pink fabric of her dress, a mockery of the evening's glamour, was hidden beneath a starchy white apron already bearing the day's sins in grease and wine. She plunged her hands back into the scalding water. This was penance, she supposed. However, she had not committed the crime. Her friends had. Maya, with her sharp smile and sharper words, had called it a dare. A hilarious, ironic twist for their night out. They were supposed to be guests at the annual Black Orchid Gala, an event so exclusive that invitations were practically mythology. But Maya's ticket had been rescinded at the last minute, a clerical error she'd blamed on a rival.
So she'd concocted this plan.
A way to get in, to be part of the story. She'd convinced Alara it was a harmless prank. Just for an hour. They would sneak in through the service entrance, see the spectacle from the inside, and have a story no one else could tell. But the moment they were past the loading docks, the tone shifted. A harried catering manager, mistaking them for the agency temps who had bailed, had barked orders. Maya had shoved an apron into Alara's hands, her eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of glee. "You owe me, Alara. Remember last winter? Just play along. I'll come get you in a bit," and then she and Jessica had vanished into the thrum of the party, leaving Alara in the fluorescent hell of the main kitchen. That was 3 hours ago. The lie was a stone in her gut. There was no dare. This was a punishment, meted out for some perceived slight Alara could not even name. She was simply the friend who was quiet enough to be pushed. The heat was oppressive. A symphony of clanging pots, shouted orders in Spanish and French, and the relentless hiss of the industrial dishwasher filled the air. Alara worked with a methodical rhythm, her mind detaching from the sting in her waterlogged hands. She focused on the weight of each plate, the precise angle to hold it under the sprayer, the satisfying slide as it fit into the rack. It was a problem with a solution. A task with a clear beginning and end. Unlike her marriage. Unlike the man she was married to. Dante Moretti did not attend parties. He owned them. He owned the building they were in. He likely owned the catering company, the security firm, and the valet service. He owned the silence in a room when he entered it. She was supposed to be on his arm tonight, a silent, beautiful accessory in a gown that cost more than the car Maya drove. But she had called him that afternoon, her voice tight with a practiced lie about a sudden migraine. He had accepted it with a low murmur, his voice like gravel and velvet over the phone. He did not ask questions because he already knew the answers. Or he would soon enough. That was the thought that made her hands tremble. He would find out. It was inevitable. And Dante did not tolerate deception, especially from her. He considered it a stain on his honor, an insult to the strange, dangerous protection he offered. He would not be angry. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. Dante was cold. He was surgical. He would look at her with those eyes, the color of a winter storm over the ocean, and she would feel the temperature of the world drop. A stack of dessert plates, sticky with chocolate and raspberry coulis, landed on the stainless steel counter with a clatter. A cook shot her a dark look and disappeared back into the fray. She took a breath, the air thick with the smell of scorched sugar and bleach, and reached for the top plate. She could not call him. She could not walk out. Maya and Jessica had her clutch, her phone, her dignity. Leaving would mean crossing the pristine ballroom in a soiled apron, a ghost at a feast she was meant to grace. It would create a scene. And in Dante's world, a scene was a weakness. A weakness was an invitation for an enemy to strike. So she stayed. She washed the plates. And she waited for the reckoning. The kitchen doors swung open, a brief slash of golden light and music cutting through the humid chaos. A man in a black suit stood there, his eyes scanning the room. Not a caterer. Not a chef. He was one of Dante's.
Marco.
His gaze swept past her, then snapped back, his professional calm cracking for a fraction of a second. He saw the dress under the apron. He saw her face. His jaw tightened. He did not approach. He simply turned and disappeared back into the gilded world beyond the doors. Alera's heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm of resignation, began to hammer against her ribs. It was over. The waiting was done. The reckoning was here. She stared at the closed doors, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the steel sink. The sounds of the kitchen faded into a dull roar. The only thing she could hear was the frantic pulse in her own ears. He was here, and he was coming for her. The kitchen doors did not open again for 10 minutes. For Alera, it was a lifetime. She kept working, her movements automatic, her mind a blank canvas of dread. She scrubbed a stubborn smear of lipstick from a champagne flute, her own reflection warped and pale in the glass. When the doors finally did swing inward, it was not with a dramatic flourish. It was with a silence that was more profound than any sound. Dante Moretti stood on the threshold. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the catering manager, a florid man currently screaming at a young busboy. Dante did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply existed in that space, a pillar of bespoke charcoal wool and cold fury, and the room began to fall quiet. The clatter of pans softened. The shouting died in the manager's throat. Every person in that kitchen, from the executive chef to the boy mopping the floor, felt the shift in gravity. They turned, their eyes wide, drawn to the source of the sudden, suffocating pressure. Then, and only then, did his eyes find hers. Across the expanse of stainless steel and steaming sinks, he looked at her. He took in the stained apron, the pale pink dress beneath it, the raw redness of her hands. His face was a mask carved from stone, giving nothing away. But his eyes held a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane, utterly clear and utterly destructive. He took a single step into the kitchen, and the manager, finally realizing who was standing in his domain, scurried forward, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. "Mr. Moretti."
Sir.
"I had no idea. Is there a problem with the service?" Dante's gaze did not leave Alera. "There is," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that cut through the last vestiges of kitchen noise. He said her name. He said it softly, with an inflection no one else ever used. It was not a question. It was a summons. Alera. She let the champagne flute slip from her fingers. It hit the rubber mat at the bottom of the sink with a dull thud. She could not move. She could only watch as he started toward her, his path clearing as if by an invisible force. The kitchen staff parted, pressing themselves against counters and ovens, trying to become invisible. He moved like the room owed him space. He stopped in front of her, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something cold like winter air, cutting through the kitchen's greasy miasma. He was close enough that she could see the fine silver threads at his temples, the faint, old scar that bisected his left eyebrow. His eyes swept over her one more time, a slow, meticulous inventory of her humiliation. He did not offer a hand. He did not offer comfort. He simply looked at the catering manager, who was now trembling slightly. "Who put her here?" Dante's voice was deceptively calm. The manager stammered, his eyes darting from Dante to Alera and back again. She came with the others. The agency temps. We were short-staffed, sir." "I assumed." "You assumed," Dante repeated. It was not a question. It was a verdict. He reached out, not to touch Alera, but to gently take the corner of her soiled apron between his thumb and forefinger. He held it for a moment, as if examining a piece of evidence. Then he untied the knot at the small of her back with a single, efficient tug. The apron fell away, pooling at her feet like a shed skin. He looked at her hands, submerged in the murky water. "Take them out." She obeyed, lifting her hands. They were pink and puckered, the skin angry and raw. A small cut on her knuckle, which she hadn't even felt, was beading with blood. Dante's jaw clenched, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of muscle. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on Marco, who now stood silently by the door. "Find her friends," he said. The order was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Marco nodded once, and was gone. Dante looked back at the manager. This kitchen is closed for the night. Send everyone home. They will be paid for the full shift, plus a bonus for their inconvenience. The manager's mouth opened and closed. But the gala, the dessert course. The gala is over, Dante stated, as if discussing the weather. He took off his suit jacket, the movement fluid and economical, and draped it over Alera's shoulders. The fine wool was warm from his body, heavy with his scent. It enveloped her, a shield against the 100 pairs of eyes that were now fixed on them. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a touch that was both a comfort and a claim. It was firm, proprietary, and it steered her toward the door. As they walked out of the kitchen and into the golden light of the main hall, she could feel the silence rippling out from them. The music faltered. Conversations died. Heads turned. She was intensely aware of her state of undress, her damp, clinging dress, her bare feet on the cool marble, her hair falling from its pins. But the weight of Dante's jacket and the solid presence of his hand on her back were an armor more formidable than any gown. He led her not toward the main exit, but down a private corridor she had never seen before. They entered a small, richly appointed study. A bottle of amber liquor and 2 glasses sat on a mahogany desk. He closed the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden quiet. He led her to a leather armchair and gently pushed her down into it. He knelt before her, taking one of her hands in his. His own hands were large and warm, calloused at the palms. He examined the small cut on her knuckle with an unnerving focus. "Who were they?" he asked, his voice still dangerously soft. "It doesn't matter," she whispered, her throat tight. "To me, it does." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no pity in them. There was something harder, something that looked like recognition. "Loyalty is everything, Alera. Betrayal requires a response. You know this." She did know it. It was the first and last commandment in his world. She had seen the consequences of that commandment firsthand. She had seen men who had crossed him simply cease to exist. That was what she had been trying to avoid. A scene, a response. But she had only delayed it. And in doing so, she had made it worse. He rose and walked to the desk, pouring a small amount of the liquor into a glass. He returned and held it out to her. She shook her head. He did not insist. He set the glass down and went into an adjoining bathroom, returning with a first aid kit. He knelt before her again, opening the kit and taking out an antiseptic wipe. "This will sting," he said, his voice flat. He cleaned the small cut with a tenderness that was so at odds with his reputation, with the cold power he projected, that it made her ache. He worked in silence, his focus absolute. He applied a small bandage with precise, careful movements. When he was done, he did not let go of her hand. He held it, his thumb stroking gently over her bruised knuckles. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything they did not say. Her foolishness, her shame, his fury, his possession. She had married him knowing what he was. A man carved from violence and shadow, the undisputed king of New York's criminal underworld. It had been a transaction. Her father, a man with a gambling habit and bad instincts, had owed Dante an impossible debt. Alera had been the payment. A wife to give him the veneer of respectability, a tie to an old family name. She was to be his queen, untouchable and serene. And tonight, she had been found scrubbing plates in his kitchen. "They thought it was funny," she finally said, the words tasting like ash. "To put me in my place." Dante's thumb stopped moving. "And where is that?" "Somewhere beneath them, I suppose." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "No one is beneath them," he said, his voice a low growl. "They are the bottom. They used your loyalty, your quiet strength, against you. They thought it was a weakness." He finally let go of her hand and stood up, turning to look out the window at the manicured gardens, now dark and empty. "They made the same mistake his brother did." Alera went still. He never spoke of his older brother, Lorenzo. He was a ghost in their house, a name unspoken, his portrait absent from the gallery of family photos. All she knew was that Lorenzo had died years ago, a death that had cemented Dante's ascension to the head of the family. It was his wound, the one place he was vulnerable. Lorenzo was betrayed by his closest friend, Dante continued, his back still to her. A man he brought in. A man he vouched for. The man who led him into an ambush. I was supposed to be there. But I was delayed, he turned, and for a fleeting moment, she saw it. A flicker of old, raw pain in his eyes. A wound that had never healed. I learned then that loyalty is not a feeling. It is an action. And betrayal is a debt that is always paid in full. He looked at her, and she understood. Her humiliation at the hands of her friends was not just a social embarrassment to him. It was a reflection of the deepest betrayal he had ever known. It was an echo of the failure he still carried. In his world, her allowing them to do this was a failure of strength. A failure to see the enemy right beside her. A sharp knock on the door broke the tension. "Enter," Dante called. Marco stepped inside, his face impassive. "We found them. They were trying to leave." Through a side exit he paused. "They are with Silvio Rossi." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Allera felt the name like a punch to the gut. Silvio Rossi, the head of the rival Russo family. A man whose name was only ever spoken in whispers. A man Dante had been in a cold war with for the past year. Dante's face became a granite mask. "Where?" "The East Terrace." Rossi requested a meeting. He used the girls to deliver the message. Of course. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a punishment from her friends.
It was a setup.
Maya and Jessica had been pawns, or perhaps willing participants, in a much more dangerous game. They had not just humiliated her. They had delivered her husband's enemy to his doorstep. And they had used her to do it. Dante looked at Allera. His expression was no longer cold. It was something else. Something primal. Predatory. He was looking at her not as a disgraced wife, but as a piece on the board. A piece that had just been moved by his enemy. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me," he commanded. He walked to the door, Marco falling into step behind him. "Dante," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, but he did not turn. "They don't know who I am. Rossi. His men. They saw me in the kitchen. They think I'm just staff." He was silent for a long moment. Then, without looking back, he said, "I know." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. She did not lock it. She sat frozen in the chair, the weight of his jacket a suffocating presence. She had thought this was about her pride, about a cruel prank, but it was about territory, about power, about a war she was now standing in the middle of. Rossi had seen her. He believed she was nobody, a dishwasher, a servant, an invisible part of the scenery. That was the mistake she had made all night, letting people see her as small and unassuming. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if it was an advantage? She stood up, the jacket slipping from her shoulders onto the chair. She walked to the door, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She eased it open a crack. The corridor was empty. The distant sound of shouting, a crash of glass, then silence, drifted from the direction of the East Terrace. She thought of the kitchen, the warren of service corridors behind it, the dumbwaiters, the storage rooms, the loading bay. She had spent 3 hours in that world. She knew its layout. She knew its blind spots. Rossi and his men would have come in through the front, like guests. But they would not plan on leaving that way. They would use the service exits. The exits she now knew better than Dante's own men. She crossed a line in that moment. A line she could not uncross. She told herself it was survival. But it was something else. It was a cold, clear rage. Maya and Jessica had tried to make her invisible. Silvio Rossi had looked right through her. They were all about to learn that the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees. She slipped out of the study and ran, her bare feet making no sound on the marble floors, back toward the fluorescent lights and the smell of bleach. Back toward the kitchen. She moved through the deserted workspace, her mind a flurry of blueprints and possibilities. The main service elevator was at the far end of the corridor. It was the fastest way down to the loading docks and the waiting cars. She ignored it. Too obvious. Her eyes landed on a heavy-duty rolling rack used for storing sheet pans, a massive steel beast currently laden with cooling bread. It took all her strength, but she managed to get it moving, its wheels groaning in protest. She maneuvered it not toward the elevator, but to a narrow junction in the corridor, a place where the passage to the East Terrace fire escape met the main service hallway. She wedged it into the corner, creating an impassable blockade. It would not stop them for long, but it would redirect them. It would force them west, toward the old wine cellar, a dead end with only one way in or out.
She heard them then.
Hurried footsteps, guttural curses. They were coming. She ducked into a small, dark pantry, pulling the door almost closed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She peered through the crack. Two of Rossi's men appeared first, guns drawn, their eyes scanning the corridor. They saw the blockade, swore, and gestured back down the hall. A moment later, Rossi appeared, dragging Maya by the arm. Jessica stumbled behind them. Both women were pale with terror, their party dresses torn, their faces streaked with tears. Rossi was furious, a dark bruise blooming on his cheek. "This way," he snarled, shoving Maya toward the west corridor. The cellar exit. They disappeared around the corner. Alera waited, counting to 10, her breath held tight in her chest. Then she heard it, Dante's voice, calm and lethal, from the direction they had just come. "Silvio, you forgot something." She slipped out of the pantry. She crept to the corner and looked. Dante stood at the far end of the hall, flanked by two of his men. He was holding a pistol, his arm relaxed at his side as if he were holding a glass of wine. He looked entirely calm. Inevitable. The cellar door, at the other end of the hall, burst open. Rossi's men came out firing. Dante's men returned fire with disciplined, precise shots. It was over in seconds. The corridor was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and a sudden, ringing silence. Dante walked forward, his steps measured, his eyes fixed on the cellar doorway where Rossi was now using Maya as a human shield. "Let her go, Silvio," Dante said, his voice resonating in the narrow space. "She means nothing to me." Rossi laughed, a ragged, ugly sound. "She means something to your wife." They came in together. "Friends." Dante's face did not change. "My wife has no friends." The finality in his voice was absolute. It was a pronouncement, a truth. And in that moment, Alera knew it was real. He had severed the tie. He had erased them. From her vantage point, Alera could see what Dante could not. Jessica, wild-eyed with panic, was behind Rossi. She had picked up a fallen gun. Her hands were shaking violently as she tried to aim it, not at Dante, but at Rossi. A stupid, desperate move that would get them all killed. Alera did not shout. She did not scream. She acted. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall mount, hefted it, and threw it with all her might down the corridor. It spun end over end, crashing into a steel prep table with a deafening clang. Every head turned toward the sound for a split second. It was all Dante needed. He moved with a speed that was terrifying, closing the distance. One shot, a muffled crack, and Rossi crumpled to the floor, releasing Maya, who collapsed in a sobbing heap. Jessica dropped the gun, as if it had burned her. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. Dante stood over Rossi's body, his expression cold. He did not look at Maya or Jessica. He looked down the hall, directly at the pantry where Alera was slowly emerging from the shadows. His eyes met hers. He saw her, standing there in her ruined dress, barefoot, her hands smudged with grime from the rolling rack. He saw what she had done, the blockade, the diversion, the deliberate chaos of the fire extinguisher. He saw that she had not been a victim. She had been a player. She had shaped the battlefield. He walked toward her, his men already dealing with the aftermath, dragging the bodies away, pulling the hysterical women to their feet. He stopped in front of her. He reached out and gently brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was featherlight. "I told you to stay put," he said. There was no heat in his voice. Only a quiet, dangerous intensity. You told me to lock the door, she corrected him softly. I chose not to. A ghost of something flickered in his eyes. It was not a smile. It was something far rarer. Respect. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent confession passing between them. He had seen her not as a liability, but as an asset. A queen who knew how to fight from the shadows. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Let's go home, he said. He led her away from the carnage, away from the wreckage of her old life. As they walked through the now empty ballroom, its splendor a hollow echo, she did not look back. There was nothing there for her. Her past had been surgically excised. In the car, a silent, armored cocoon moving through the sleeping city, he did not speak. He simply held her hand. Back in their penthouse, overlooking the glittering expanse of Manhattan, he led her to the bathroom. He turned on the water in the enormous tub, his movements still precise and deliberate. He said nothing as he helped her out of the ruined dress, his gaze clinical, yet possessive. As she sank into the hot water, he sat on the edge of the tub. He picked up a soft cloth and a bar of expensive, sandalwood-scented soap. He took her hands, the ones that had been scraped raw in a kitchen sink, and began to gently wash them. He cleaned away the grime and the memory of the night, his touch careful, his focus absolute. He was not apologizing for what his world had done to her. He would never apologize for what he was. This was his acknowledgement. This was his claim. She was his. And tonight, he had discovered what that truly meant. She was not just the woman who shared his name. She was the woman who understood the language of his world. She had survived it. And in doing so, she had earned her place at his side. He finished washing her hands, his thumb stroking the bandage he had applied hours, a lifetime, ago. The war outside was over. The one between them had just begun.